Welcome back to another edition of Black Men Screaming. My name is Maurice Carver, Executive Director of Stride Incorporated, and the host of your show. And joining us via Skype in California is our gifted, brilliant scholar, Professor James Taylor. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thank you for having me back, Maurice. Great to be back on Black Men Screaming.
Oh yeah, we love having you here, and we love having your particular insight. And I want to talk about a couple of different things that I see that's been going on in the news, and then bring up some things that we haven't had a chance since our last conversation to discuss.
Sure.
I've talked to you about, we've talked several times about the issue of marijuana on the show, and the impact that marijuana has had on particular communities, especially communities of color. We've had we've been airing some of your segments, along with the segment that was filmed by a great producer, Joe Friendly in New York, talking about the impact and the future of legalization of marijuana in America and the restitution that should be granted to particular communities. One of the things that I thought was interesting about that particular conversation was they connected that conversation with law enforcement and the whole idea of racial profiling. And they asked the question stating, what would America look like without racial profiling? And then I thought about you for a second, James, when you talked about the idea of the census and what's going to be happening in America. What do you think America would look like without this whole idea of racial profiling? Because based on what you've said, we're going to see that eventually, aren't we?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's not so deeply embedded in the bloodline of America that the white population decline necessarily implies that racism would decline, because there are other groups that are anti-black, even if they're minorities. Most minority groups are anti-black too. So any of those groups that came into power, in general, in terms of dominant power, would likely be racist towards black people too. And the census projections I've read and seen suggest that there is going to be an emerging Asian elite in about 2065. And again, I'm not into conspiracy theories. I'm talking about based on U.S. Census data. And it suggested that out of this browning process of America's browning, that eventually, because the black population by about 2055 will reach 65 million, and then by 2065 it reaches another 10 million, to the point of being 75 million by 2065. And every other group also increases. The Asian population doubles. In fact, Asians, particularly South Asians, like people from Afghanistan, Pakistan, other places, they are the fastest growing population in the U.S., outpacing even Latinos. The Asian population will go from 3 to 6%, it projects. The Latino population already now in every county district across the United States, including in majority white states like Iowa, Maine, New Hampshire, South Dakota, North Dakota, Latino birth rates are outperforming white birth rates. And the real emergency of America is that the white population is dying out in 33 of 50 states. This is Google. You can Google this for yourself. Again, this is not conspiracy theory. This is all based on census projections. I'm a political scientist. I can't be irresponsible and I can't be Alex Jones and just make up crazy stuff. We might both get rich, but it wouldn't be good social science. But the research suggests that the black population in every other group is exploding in a population boom, except the white population. And that's part of the crisis that you see manifesting itself in our politics, in particular Trump and the racial reaction you see every day on social media now. So the racial profiling phenomena, it will just change who racial profiles black people, including other black people who now in the present racial profile black people in New York City, where you had 800,000 people profiled. I think it was in about 2010 and every year after that until recently. And the total people who ended up, who ended up with more marijuana and weapons on them were the white people that they stopped and frisked, and less the African American population, which was overwhelmingly stopped and frisked. The psychology of race in America would only trade one dominant group that condescends towards black people for another dominant group that condescends towards black people. So, because we're talking about, we can talk, both of us, 500 years of American history that we know of, where racism has just never gone away. And the white group has changed. The dominant white group in the beginning were the Protestants. And then the WASPs eventually emerged out of them, away from New England, where the Protestant work ethic and New England foundations of the country were established. Then you got new whites, the New Englanders. And there was always a tension between whites in, say, New England and whites in Virginia. That was the political division of early America. And then later, at the turn of the 20th century, the 1880s until the turn of the 20th century, you get the influx of all the white immigrants. And they intensify racism because they need racism to catapult themselves in the United States as ethnic groups.
So let me ask a question, James, pertaining to that whole narrative. Just thinking about something as you were talking, and so when we talk about the future, and we talk about a future where there is no such thing as racial profiling, if that we ever morph into that particular type of society, I was thinking to myself, what will American society look like? And I thought about, for example, since the decline in population, will the United States morph into a situation something like India, where they had a small ruling class of whites, and then they had a buffer zone of selected people in between them to help them rule and govern the country? And I thought maybe that is something that might happen. This country might morph into. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think South Africa is a good example, because
exactly
when blacks were under the apartheid regime, they were locked out of political and economic power. And that's the foundation of the current situation in South Africa.
And they brought the Indians in as a buffer zone.
That's right. That's right. And then broke the racial groups into different groups of colored and black, Zulu, Xhosa, and, etc. In South Africa, once blacks got political power, it did not parlay into economic power. It just meant that they had the right to vote. But I've been there a couple of times in the post-Mandela era, and blacks are still poor. There's an emergent middle class under the former Prime Minister Thabo Mbeki, Domino Mbeki, the son of Thabo Mbeki, and Jacob Zuma, who just stepped down. But part of the real resentment of Mandela there amongst blacks, and Winnie Mandela vocalized this before she passed, was that Mandela made a kind of promise akin to the New Deal or Great Society, examples that we have here in our politics, a wholesale commitment to, using public resources to transform the predicament of the majority of blacks in South Africa. And it didn't happen. It resulted in whites retaining power and economic power and land. And in South Africa, blacks live in abject poverty. There's an emergent middle class, but it's superficial. It's symbolized by a cigar and a cognac. If you can sit around and look British, then you've made it, the new South Africa. That was under Mbeki. But in the United States, you could end up with a white. That's what the expectation is that a new type of white, a new type of elite, racial elite would emerge, and it would have to be racial because that's the only formula this country's ever had for any group's elevation. There is no other way. It's not simply through money. It's been through race that groups have elevated in the United States, always at the expense of blacks and Native Americans. Everyone else has been able to climb up. Everyone else, even black immigrants, have been able to climb up on the narrative of Black America. And as long, Richard Pryor, said that, the word nigger was the most American word in the English dictionary. He said, and when you come to America, once you use that word, you get your A whooped. He said, but now you made it into America, because at least you're not at the bottom of the American racial totem. And as a consequence, as I was saying before you asked the question, the immigrant whites, the Italians, Jews, the Irish, the Poles, Eastern Europeans like Russians who come much later, and then the Arabs who come in 1965 and after, they gave a new life to racism in America. Different than the old whites, the Anglos, and the WASPs. They never ceased to be racist, but they removed themselves from it because they had these new whites to carry on a new tradition of lynching. And